Welcome to another episode of Dilemma. I'm your host, Sharon K. Muller. Webster's definition of dilemma, a situation in which a difficult choice must be made between two or more alternatives. This show hopes to present current hot topics and provide information for your contemplation. Today's topic is the ocean's dilemma. Our oceans are experiencing stress from many angles: pollution, fishing, nutrient loading, climate change, and windmills. Excited as I am to see so many possibilities to improve our environment, are we so frantic to catch up that we embrace straws in the wind without proper vetting? Let not the proposed solution be worse than the problem. However, there are two sides to everything, and if we spend enormous time on vetting, research, and analysis, will we lose the window of opportunity to fix or slow down the degradation of our environment? And what suffers during the wait? The ocean and its inhabitants, such as the beloved right whale. Today, we are fortunate to have Charles Stormy Mayo, PhD, senior scientist and director of the North Atlantic Right Whale Ecology Program at the Center for Coastal Studies in Provincetown, Mass. In 1975, Dr. Mayo, along with two other scientists, founded the center and since has been studying endangered large whales, directing efforts to understand the interaction between whales and the ecosystems that support them. Dr. Mayo, welcome to Dilemma. It is a pleasure to meet you.
It's good to join you, and I think a fascinating title for this series because I think more than we realize from the modern news, we are constantly presented with the very dilemma that you've set up for us. So I do appreciate that, and I have a few graphics to come along with what I'd like to present. And maybe we'll be able to talk about this dilemma. The story that you've already shaped up just to begin with is one that presents the dilemma that I think many of us on Cape Cod have heard about, and in fact most of us have probably had to deal with. This really shows what I think is the simple conflict that you and I will be talking about, although later I'll try to describe a much more complicated issue that we all have to deal with. In the case of the wind generators and wind farms that we all hear about, and I'm sure many of us have different views of, it is pitting the wind energy effort and ultimately the renewable energy story against such things as fisheries, the visual problem that some people have seeing windmills, wind generators, and ultimately what I'd like to use as simply an example of the conflict is a thing that I think an issue that is always before us, and that is protecting our wildlife. In this case, I'll just use the extreme example of the right whales, which I happen to be working with. I'm going to make a case that this is the dilemma, but I'm also going to make a case that ultimately the whale is somewhat representative of the ocean as a whole, and the real conflict is here shown potentially the dilemma between putting in wind energy farms and what that does to the ocean as a whole. We'll use the right whale as an example of that, and I'll get into just a bit of the right whale work that I do so we can understand that. But always keep in mind that behind the story of the whale is in fact the larger story of the ocean. They're one and the same in many ways. The animals that I deal with, they're shown in this slide, and there are really two different species that are plankton-feeding whales, and they're circled in yellow. The one on the lower right is not a particularly good illustration, but an illustration of a right whale. We'll see a couple of images of that animal. The one that I'm using is the example. And I think it's important to start out identifying where we stand with them. And in orange at the bottom, well, let me just read this as a whole, but make sure we focus on the bottom part of this statement. These are not the beasts of legend that frightened and gave us epic stories of men contesting sovereignty of the sea with them. They are now to be seen as our charges. We are stewards of them and masters of their future. And I would add masters also of the future of the ocean, since my animal here is an example of it.
Dr. Mayo, that reminds me of an Indian proverb: treat the earth well. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. The American Indian, I think, totally captured the essence of protecting the environment.
Yes.
And not abusing it. And that relates to it perfectly.
Yeah. Well, I certainly not only see that as a good example, but certainly something we should pay attention to. The story of the whale is one that, such that as best we can tell, the whales lived rather compatibly with the Native Americans who lived along these shores. They harvested them only when they died. So I think that's an apt connection between this concept that we've really got to change our vision of the ocean and of the animals, and the Native Americans may have had it right. So the right whale, anyway, for those of you who, and certainly many of your people who follow this have seen right whales' tails, and this is, I just threw this tail in, so in the middle of the winter, if you see these beautiful tails in the air, you know what you're looking at. It's the animal that we're talking about.
A gorgeous sight.
They have a V spout in the upper left corner of the slide. They have wide flippers, big rounded flippers, and sometimes particularly close to the shore off of Provincetown and off Manomet on the other side of the bay, we may see these animals.
I thought that it was just one single spout.
It is for most whales, but for the right whale, it's as the upper left. It's a V, and my family, working out of Provincetown, and I'm sure many others on the inside of Cape Cod, the fishermen who had an interest in hunting them in the 1800s, back to the 1700s, would stand on the beach, and if they saw a V spout, they would say, that must be right whales, so we'll go after them.
Wow.
So, I mean, one can imagine that the Native Americans saw plenty of those. They weren't able to get to them, but they waited for them to naturally die and harvest them. Right whales have huge mouths, and I'll say something about those mouths and what an important part of the story they play in this issue of the dilemma that we're talking about. These are precious creatures. This is a mother and calf. We do name the animals. Scientists do. It's really a mnemonic device. If we give it a name rather than a number, we'll remember it.
And that's when you tag them.
Well, they're naturally tagged. Each whale has its own marking, so we don't have to tag them. If we see them, we know them. We have catalogs of images, and we can match the images.
Where are the markings located?
They're on the head, and in this image you'll see there's sort of a yellowish patch on the head of the animal. In this case, it's facing downward. The mother has a very distinct pattern there, and close up, those patterns are individually distinctive.
Like fingerprints.
Fingerprints, yes. So, and a last image of a couple of them. These are all whales for which we have long histories. These are animals that come to Cape Cod Bay on a regular basis. Cape Cod Bay has the highest density of right whales left on Earth in the middle of the winter. So we have a very active program. I'm just beginning retirement from the program, so I won't have to administer it anymore, but a very well-known scientist will be taking over the administration of the project, Daniel Palacios, so you'll hear a lot more of him, and your viewers will likely hear about Daniel in the future. But that's the work that we do in the right whale program. And I think the most important part of this...
Can I interrupt right here? You had mentioned that the right whales are here at Cape Cod. Why? I mean, there's the whole Atlantic coast.
Right.
How come they're not elsewhere?
Well,
What do we have that attracts
We know they're capable of and once did live across the whole Atlantic basin. They were originally hunted off of Spain and France. They're no longer seen there because they've been extirpated, eliminated from those habitats. So they're now confined to this western coast of the Atlantic, and Cape Cod Bay appears to provide the whales in midwinter with basically probably food, a good habitat to make a living. Like all of us, they go where the living is good. The story of right whales, I think, is best represented by this graphic. It appears from statistical work that's been done by exceptional statisticians working in Woods Hole, using the pictures that we take of the animals. They're able to make estimates of how many whales there are, and these are several different calculations of the trajectory. But the important thing is that up till about 2010, and that's the years on the base of this graphic, there were increasing numbers of right whales. And in about 2010, something happened, and that's all a lot of hypothesis, and the whales' numbers declined. We believe there's now 350 or thereabouts left in the world. This species is on the very, very brink of extinction.
And those 350 are here.
Well, those 350 eventually come here. We may see as many as almost 300 animals in the bay any given year by simply counting the number of pattern marks that we see. We can say that's individual 1, this is individual 2, and we can count that. So close to 300 individuals in our project have been seen in the bay in any given winter. Most winters not quite that many, but a very large segment of one of the rarest mammals on Earth, and that's our animal, Cape Cod Bay. This is an image of a jar about the size of a water glass filled with little tiny things. Those are all shrimp-like animals that the right whales eat. And here's another look from a microscope of them, and a whale with its mouth open feeding. And that brings us to the next part of this dilemma, because that's what we're here to talk about, and it's we should. And that is that the ocean is changing, and we all, I think by now, most of us have recognized that we are looking at a difficult set of circumstances. There is clear indication from all different directions, from right whales and lobsters and clams, across the whole marine ecosystem. The system is changing here as well as across the world. And so we have climate change, which is indeed, it used to be, people would say at the beginning of our understanding of, or developing understanding of climate change, that it couldn't be. It's, you must be wrong, was the line, when people really generally didn't believe it. And I've recently had a chance to say, they were right, we were wrong. In the beginning, we did not estimate how bad it was. The situation worldwide now is extraordinary and happening before our eyes at a rate that has never happened before in geological time. It is a situation that is causing rapid collapse of ecosystems. And this is the kind of graphic you will see, the orange line showing the increase in temperature, in this case in the globe, in the world. And then if we look at the ocean, we can see the amount of heating that is going on. This generally is showing how much increase there is, I believe, over the last about 40 years, showing that almost everywhere in the world's oceans there's an increase.
You've got some patches of blue.
There are spots that are, and you'll see if you can read that twisted image, you say, well, why is there a place where there's blue way up on top? That's in the north, in the far North Atlantic. And if you'll notice, that sort of odd-shaped structure above it is Greenland. So why is it cold there? It's because Greenland is melting, and the meltwaters that are colder are flowing into the ocean, which is generally hotter, and Greenland is shrinking, the Greenland ice cap. So that's the reason for what at first looks like an odd situation. We're heating everywhere except for there. Well, generally we believe the same thing is happening in the Antarctic. So huge volumes of water, which is why we have the rapid rise of the sea. And indeed, this just shows, the orange shows the increase in water temperatures in this graphic through the years at the bottom, and the temperatures at the vertical axis, showing that the surface waters are increasing in temperature very dramatically. And the midwaters are even increasing. That's the blue waters below 1,000 feet in the deep ocean. So the whole system is changing.
So the orange and the yellow are more surface temperatures of water, and the blue goes down lower. Where do our whales live? Whales
are in the orange section. They're in the upper 1,000 feet generally. There are a few species that are deep divers, but the right whales, for instance, are almost their whole life is in, probably their whole life is in the upper 1,000 to 2,000 feet of water.
So in turn, they are affected by the warming.
Yes, they're affected by the warming in that they're receiving warmer water, but they also are affected because the organisms that they depend on, very small and sensitive, are even more impacted. So I guess the message here is that the ocean is undergoing substantial change, and that change is profound. It's going through the whole system, including to the great depths of the ocean. And the systems, meaning the organisms that form the basis of life in the sea, are all undergoing change. In some cases, as we know from lobsters in our local area, Cape Cod Bay is still very productive, but the south shore of Cape Cod has shown a dramatic reduction in lobsters as one example. And further south, there used to be lobstering in a number of locations along Long Island and whatever. And really, the lobsters have now declined, and it's thought pretty clearly that it's a temperature change.
This slide, the red indicates what?
Well, this is to show that the upper waters, which are shown in red, the warmer waters, are on a constant conveyor belt of currents, transport of water from low latitudes to high latitudes. And so part of the system that balances it is that the warm water in the equatorial region is being pulled to the north by currents. Okay. And this is just a very simple description of that, but it is to say that not only is temperature going up, but the transport mechanisms are changing radically. So not only do we see increasing warming, but currents are changing, and the result is that the distribution of animals and their capacity to live in the old systems are no longer holding up. And the system, so I think the point here is that the system is really complicated. And it's so complicated, I just show this as almost an amusing example of what's called a simplified food web of the Northwest Atlantic, our food web. That means organisms, which are all the places where the food joins, animals are all using it. And it's just to show that this is simplified. It is the complex system, and everything is locked together. A clam has an impact on a right whale, and a right whale has an impact on a clam. And if you start rearranging the way organisms live, then the resources that you and I depend on, among other things, from the ocean will be impacted. So what do we do? And that brings up the conflict and the last part of what I think we should talk about. And that brings up, of course, the question of placement of wind farms, as has happened in Europe. There are thousands of these generators in the North Sea and the Baltic. And the question is for the right whale, and remember, we're speaking about the right whale as an example of the ocean, what is this likely to cause? These huge wind farms that we would not otherwise want to see. And I need to say, as many people on the Cape will know, I have generally opposed, as an individual more than a scientist, I've opposed the industrialization of the oceans. I do not believe that we should use the oceans as though it's an industrial farm. And certainly you can argue that wind falls into that. But the situation we are looking at in the world system is so severe now, not only for us tolerating increasing temperatures, winters that are no longer much winters, even in my lifetime, changes like that, but in the oceans, a place that, as we've seen, is very complex, and yet we depend on it, 70% of the globe. How do we deal with this terrible dilemma of increasing temperature, changing our lives, increasing the depth of the height of the sea, and inundating us and causing increased storms and whatever, while at the same time dealing with the fact that the cures for this, such as wind farms, are things we'd rather not see and that have their impacts. So lastly, I've just stuck this together, and it's very quick. It's just to show that there are a whole bunch of things that wind farms are likely to do. They will, in terms of the marine ecosystem, the thing that we all depend on, the disruption is going to be substantial to build them. They create huge noise when they're being constructed, and noise when they're operating, although that's not well understood. We will have increased vessel traffic. There are wake effects. These structures cause effects on the ocean. The currents no longer move smoothly, but they become turbulent. There is decreased wind, and wind is important in the ecosystem. There is a decrease in the wind energy and a loss of habitat. So there's a problem for whales created by these. But the question is, I think, more finely tuned to the right side, which is what will happen if we get climate change, which these structures are intended to try to arrest. And the answer is the system that we have depended on very clearly now and without much doubt is going to undergo a change which has never been seen by right whales and their ancestors, or the clams and their ancestors, or the shrimp or the cod. There is such a profound change coming that the future of right whales, which may be lying in part with what happens with the construction of these things, the future of right whales is more certainly hanging on the issue of climate change. If climate change continues, the disruption of the ecosystem, which is already happening for right whales, will be so profound that it's unlikely that there will be recovery. The animals will, I think we can say, threatened by more stress, higher temperatures, changes in currents, and in their ecosystem, they will likely not be able to cope. So I end up opposed to industrial development, but I end up recognizing that without it, we are likely not going to find our way out for the right whales, for the ocean, and ultimately for ourselves. It's a dilemma, and it is an unpleasant one, and one that I'm not happy to see. But I have to speak for the ocean and the need for us to cure the situation that we have given it.
Perhaps should we not spend more time on looking at other energy delivery alternatives?
I think we don't have time is the issue. Certainly if we were all as a society dedicated to solving the problem, and unfortunately we're not, because there's a lot of spurious information out there. But if you listen to the people whose business it is, I've often said, if you want to construct a bridge, don't talk to me. If you want to know something about the ocean, talk to me, don't talk to an engineer who builds bridges. And unfortunately, there is a lot of poor information, but it is clear we do not have time. The Arctic, which is essential to the whole globe's weather, there are places in the Arctic that are now 10 degrees warmer than pre-industrial times, and it's happening, heating up there even faster. I think most people who look at this would say it's a horror show, and it's one we have got to stop. We need to look at all safe sources of energy, unquestionably, or we need to slow down our energy use, but I don't expect that's going to happen. And that's all spoken not as a scientist, but as just a member of the public. We've got to find a solution, and one of the big solutions we have is apparently is the development of wind energy farms in the ocean, something I do not want to have to support, but I do.
There's also the possibility of electric, and you know we're into electric cars and whatever, but that also has the other side of the coin, the batteries and the charging and whatever. But there also is nuclear energy.
And I am a supporter of looking for that. I've not liked the idea with Pilgrim Across the Ocean for me. But I just finished reading the story of Chernobyl, the meltdown in the Ukraine. And it's a terrifying potential, but one assumes with this society we can build things better. And so I think nuclear has to be considered. Eventually there's likely to be fusion, but we do not have the time to fiddle while Rome burns. In this case, while our oceans burn.
So in other words, we need to kind of jet stream our trial of a lot of these alternative sources of energy.
I think we have to be extraordinarily careful. For right whales, when we put in these wind energy generators, we have to be smart. I've worked closely with a number of scientists trying to figure out what we can do. There is out there on public media lots of commentaries about how all the whales that have been coming up on beaches south of here have been coming up because of wind energy. My colleagues working to the south on those animals say there just is absolutely no indication that it has any relationship to any wind energy surveys and whatever. And yet we must be careful. And so we got to be careful, and we may have to stick our neck out and try to stop the onrushing change in the climate, or I'm not sure any of these animals are going to make it through.
Question though, don't the whales move or navigate through sonar? And
some species do. Right whales probably do. They're certainly sensitive to sound. I don't think I would say they navigate using those methods, but dolphins, porpoises, pilot whales, and the like do in fact navigate at least short distances. They find their way through night and whatever when they can't see using sound. All these animals are very sensitive to sound, as almost all animals are.
Possibly could the windmills be affecting them?
Certainly could. There's no doubt, and that's why I listed some of the issues that the windmills bring up to us. But our knowledge level is not great enough to say very much absolutely concretely when it comes to the impacts on the ocean. What we can say is that there are no clear issues that will cause major problems at present. The problem is our level of knowledge is never great enough. Do we have the time to gain the knowledge? Something you said at the intro. And the answer is
no.
We clearly do not have that time.
Another question. Windmills, we have lots of desert. Why can't we put them out there?
I think any source ought to be open to consideration.
Okay.
Absolutely any source of energy, and there's some wonderful ones in the future, but we don't have the time, and that's really the issue. Why do we not have the time? Because as we continue to get increasing carbon in the atmosphere, we do not have a method to get rid of it yet. So if we could stop it now, we still would have a big problem. The system is already in great change. And if we don't stop it now, we're going to continue to get worse. So we've got to see an end to that increase in temperature now, and then find mechanisms. Right now, we don't have the answers. So I think all power sources should be on the table, and people should be more careful about their use of electricity.
However, we are creatures of comfort, and we seem not to be willing to give that up.
Well, I want mea culpa. I drove here. Now, I drove in a car that has an electric component, but I don't have the ability to drive everywhere in electric. And let me tell you, electric right now is still using a lot of carbon producing energy sources. So I'm to blame. I'm talking about me being the problem as well as you
We all
and
are.
virtually everything and the lights that we're producing here. We need to find a way to get out of it, and we've got to do it quick. And it's the quickness that's the issue. We'll come up with an answer, but hopefully it's not when we're 3 or 4 degrees Celsius
Away
warmer.
from extinction.
Well, we're going to start suffering, yes.
Amazing, amazing. In closing, I mentioned something, 20 fathoms. In preparing and writing up the intro to this, I think I was thinking about 20 leagues under the sea.
20,000 leagues
Yes.
under the sea.
And this stuck in my head, which I believe the definition of 20 fathoms captures the essence of who you are. Someone who is interested in gaining the understanding of a difficult problem, and you're on the path of solving it. That, I think, Dr. Mayo, describes who you are. I hope you will be willing to come back and chat with us again, because you have so much, you have a wealth of experience to share. And I think right now, we need that. We need someone who looks at it from both sides and can warn us of the dangers if we keep on the path we're on.
Well, let's talk again.
All right. Now, very quickly, Stormy, how did you get that nickname?
Literally, I was nicknamed, I'm a Provincetowner many generations. I think I'm 9th or 10th generation. And literally, I was nicknamed the night I was born. My father was coming up the coast in a schooner, and all of my family had been born in Provincetown, and they only got as far as Washington, and my mother was pregnant, and so I was born in Washington. So in some sense, I'm a 10-generation wash ashore, and there was a very heavy gale blowing. My family's always been mariners. Father was tuna fisherman. My previous family, previous to him, were mackerel fishermen, and so he grabbed the fact that it was blowing real hard the night I was born. I picked up the nickname. Lots of Provincetowners are nicknamed. It's kind of what happens on islands and points of land when you're all alone. And so I got the nickname Stormy that night, and I don't really care about fanciness, so I've always lived with that. And it's odd, but when you have a name, you don't think a lot about it anyway. It's what you are. Whenever I think about the nickname Stormy, I think that's something I might have gotten rid of early on, but I didn't. So I'm going to die with it.
It suits you, and it suits the work you do.
Yep.
Thank you again. Will you come back?
I will certainly consider it. We'll talk
Wonderful.
about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode of Dilemma. Any comments or suggestions for future topics or speakers should be directed to dilemma@mashptv.com.